101.5 Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.
It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Macon.
And I'm Lewis.
And we're the
Recovery Boys.
Hey, Lewis.
We nailed it that time.
Yeah, we're getting way better.
We really were off last week.
Yeah, well, we've been gone for a while.
Yes.
So good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for the Recovery Boys. If you want to listen to us on our website, therecoveryboys.com, you can go and there's a listen live option button that you can go to. If you want to send us an email, you can go to our website and send us an email. We will respond to it as fast as we can. One of the things that I probably should have talked about last week is this broadcast does become a podcast for us, and we do produce it. So if you hear something you want to listen to us again, or some information that you're looking for, this show will be posted to our website in the next day or two after Terry does the production part of it. And so you can listen to us, and you can listen to any of the shows that we've had. Lewis, I don't know how many we've done, but we've done a fair number of shows now.
Yes.
And we've had some great we'sts. We have another great guest. We'll introduce him in just a little while. I'll let Lewis handle that. If you're listening to us on 105.5 WFJA, you can call us at 866-465-3110 if you have a question or want to make a comment. This is, people are, you hate to use the term getting back to normal, but restaurants are open. You're starting to see functions. Some people, I guess, are maybe ignoring the social distancing rules. Lewis, have you seen, I live in Southern Pines, you live in Raleigh, much bigger. I actually met I should have called you and told you about this. I got a text from a guy I played baseball with at East Carolina. I played baseball at East Carolina in 1975, 1979, and my friend Billy Best texted me and said, hey, some of the guys are going to get together. They want to, first off, they want to verify that you're actually still alive. And it was
probably a good thing.
Yeah, it was.
Got to check in.
And so we went to Raleigh on Saturday and met at a food market downtown.
Yeah, I know you're talking about. It's the
Transfer Hall.
Morgan Street.
Morgan Street.
Morgan
it was
Street
phenomenal,
food court.
phenomenal.
It's a great place.
But there was a lot of people there. And so I think we're starting to see that. One of the conversations that we will have tonight, and we'll check in with Kayla in just a second, but one of the conversations that one of the topics we'll talk about tonight is relapse. All the uncomfortableness of our current situation, how strange our lives have become. It seems like it happened overnight. I mean, January, everything's fine, and next thing you know, they're predicting a couple million people dying, and everybody's going to get this virus. And so it's for people like you and me and our guest.
You blew his cover already.
The special,
5 minutes in.
Yeah, the special folks that can't drink or use drugs properly. Not that properly is the term that we probably should use. The additional stress has probably created some relapse opportunities. I think that we're going to see numbers in our industry that we've never seen before. People showing up at detoxes and in treatment centers. And Lewis, you probably can speak to that. So that's one of the things we want to talk about tonight. Anything, Lewis, I've been doing all the talking. You want to weigh in a little bit?
Well, just that. You brought it up. The recoveryboys.com is our website. And when we went to purchase that, I was shocked that was available.
Yeah, I was too.
There is a Recovery Boys other group. I'm not sure what they do, but we actually got therecoveryboys.com. On the site are all of the prior shows we've done. We usually post them through Wellwind to promote the upcoming show, which we've done this tonight. But I encourage everybody, if you want to learn a lot about recovery, and just so you know, and if it's not obvious to those of you that have listened, this is not scripted at all. we don't have a clue what's going to be going on. All we do is kind of take the lead of the guest. And as Macon alluded to, we have a very interesting guest tonight, and that word doesn't even describe it. He's a good friend of mine, has become a good friend, and he's got a story that will I think help impact your listening pleasure. But anyway, so the recoveryboys.com is available. This show will be up there at some point in the next 48 to 72 hours.
Yeah, correct.
Our fabulous producer will take care of that for us.
Yeah. And our on-site producer Roy keeps us sounding good.
Yes.
So we're very lucky.
Oh, yes.
We have a good situation get set up here. But let's bring Kayla on and see how Kayla. We talked to her again last week for the first time in a while, and just want to check in and see how she's doing. Hey, good evening, Kayla. How you doing?
I'm good. How are y'all?
We're hanging in there. You know, it's been another strange week. It seems like that the world's been upside down. We talked about, and I've had this conversation with some other people. One of the things you said to me last week that I really hadn't thought about was you're stuck on step 9 because you really can't make amends in social distancing. The founders of our fellowship never had to consider what social distancing would do to the steps. Have you had any luck with handling any of that, or are you just going to wait until things open back up?
I'm kind of just trying to wait. Like my parents, obviously, I've made some of those, but other people that I don't really want to do over the phone, I just kind of put on hold.
Yeah. Well, Kayla, I don't think I've ever asked you. Are you working? Do you work? You have a job?
No, I stay home with my daughter, especially now that she's
She does work.
Yeah, that's
You
believe me,
absolutely work.
that
Full-time
is
job.
You don't get paid enough. I don't care what you make.
that is full-time work for sure. And you're active in your home group.
I am very.
Yeah, and so I think that's one of the really cool things. How long have you been sober now?
Actually 10 months today.
So congratulations. 10 months.
Awesome.
10 months. You're chasing down that first 1-year chip. It's going to be something that'll be very special. I know I have my 1-year chip, and then I have my 7-year chip, the two ones that I kind of keep up with. So I'm proud of you. I'm excited for you. I know that's going to be a big deal. Anything else that you can share with our listeners tonight about sobriety, recovery, and this current environment?
Just the main thing is trying to stay connected to your fellowship. We've actually started meeting at Abermea Lake on Sundays and Thursdays.
Did you participate in the Zoom meetings? Did you watch the online? Did you do meetings online? Did you do some of that?
I did a few, and I take a meeting at Crystal Lake every week. Me and my sponsor for service work, and we've actually started doing that the last couple of weeks.
Oh, good.
Got them involved in things. Got to start back doing that. That's been kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's nothing like the person-to-person contact, which is our fellowship was built around one alcoholic helping another in person, not on the phone and not on Zoom. And so it's been complicated, I think. But you know what? It's better than completely not having conversations. And I guess the phone, our fellowship, we've been burning up the cell phone minutes, staying in touch with sponsors. And I think that the thing that we've really been missing are the new people in recovery. They always say the most important person in a meeting is the newest person. It's the most important person that walks in, and there's no place to walk in these days. And so I worry about those people that need the fellowship and don't have access to it. I think that's another thing we're gonna probably see some bigger numbers. I know that drinking rates, I know overdose rates, suicide rates, all have seen spikes over the last 10 to 12 weeks as we've kind of gone through this virus. So I'm proud of you for maintaining your sobriety and keeping your wits about you.
Hey, Megan, Kayla, this is Lewis. I have a question for you. You brought up making amends, and you said you've made them to your parents. How anxious were you to do that, and then what was their response?
I was really anxious. In the end, they say not to have expectations about how things are going to go.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Right?
Yeah. But you always hope for a good outcome, whether you want to or not, but I knew that they were supportive, and I knew that they pretty much had forgiven what was in the past, the changes I've made in the way I live now, but it's still hard to sit down and admit the wrong you've done,
It's conceptually is something that when you talk with if you happen to be in treatment, it seems like it's going to be an easy thing to do, but when it comes time to pull the trigger and actually do it, it does create some sweaty palms. Because you're not used to being honest with these people, and they're not used to the honesty, and you somewhere in the back of your mind you wonder, how's this going to turn out? And we learn in our fellowship that expectations are the beginning of resentment, and it's hard to walk in with no expectations. I mean, you want all this to work out, so I certainly get that. But you know what? Listen, you did it, and you've maintained your sobriety. You've taken care of your daughter, which I think is amazing. And you're starting to see the possibilities of a great life, which is what we in recovery hope we can preach about. I mean, unfortunately, there's just as many funerals that we end up going to as there are one-year chip celebrations. And that's the thing. Sometimes some of my friends who aren't like me, who can drink normally, they don't realize how deadly the disease is. But people die. I know that we had one of the guys that would come in and out of our home group. We had somebody who passed away, and I know he died that horrible alcoholic death that the book describes with such vivid detail. And it makes me sad. It makes me sad. But that is what we are. It's life and death for some of us. So I'm proud of you, and I appreciate you talking to us tonight. And we will talk to you next week.
All right.
Thanks,
Kayla.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Lewis, it is nice to talk to somebody who gets it. I've had some new folks that I'm working with that are relapse. I've had some relapse new, I won't call them clients, let's just call them interested parties that I'm working with. And it's just amazing to me how simple it seems it should be and how complicated we can make it.
Well, you brought up the honesty part. That really does break it all down. It's so difficult to get honest because we don't see ourselves the way others see us.
Well, you know what? But the dishonest response is immediate. It's for some of us.
Yes.
It's a learned
Sure.
situation. I know that sometimes somebody will ask me something. My wife will ask me, "Did some simple question?" And immediately I'll give her the answer I think she wants, as opposed to the one that I probably should give her, which is the honest one. And she's in recovery too, and we laugh about it, but it is almost, we're trained as people pleasers to say whatever we need to say to make things okay for that 1 second, without any regard for the long term. And of course, if you don't do your, proper inventory, eventually all those little white lies turn into a big bag of lies, and you're walking around with them, and eventually that pressure, if you don't have a really good program, you end up looking at your hand and there's a beer or a cocktail or there's a bottle of Vicodin in your hand, and you're wondering, how did I end up here?
Well, and for folks that aren't like us, they either suppress that feeling or they get depressed. They go through mood swings, but they don't anesthetize their brains with alcohol and drugs.
No, that's exactly right.
And
Can I say something here?
Absolutely. Special guest.
My name's Chris V. and Chris Filari. But with respect, we talked a little bit beforehand about this. Relapses, these bizarre upside-down circumstances we've been in since I live in Raleigh. So March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, was the day the governor announced they were closing the bars and the restaurants. And that's pretty easy to remember since it was St. Patrick's Day. But on this whole notion of rigorous honesty, And when I came to the program, I've had the same sponsor from day one, and he's really big on the specific words in the book. Not just honesty, but rigorous honesty, completely, entirely. And he would say, this is not kind of, sort of, sometime. And what I've come to realize, particularly working with newcomers, when we read in How It Works, the notion of there are those who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. Well, I look at my own experience, and I have enough time, and I've done enough fourth and fifth steps. While I was drinking or thinking about drinking or engaging and indulging some of my more self-indulgent character defects, I did not have a remote shot at being honest. I mean, if I'm thinking about drinking and I'm obsessing, I mean, there's a natural block there. We can talk. God's cutting us off from that. But my experience is when I start drifting and becoming self-centered and thinking I'm regaining some semblance of control over things, I inevitably, the little white lies, the little, I call them errors of omission, not necessarily
Right.
commission,
Right,
the things
right,
we
right.
just conveniently forgot to tell somebody because we just didn't want to go there. That to me is the first step toward that little slippery slope. And just for those of you that are listening out there, there's a reason the book talks about rigorous honesty and the how of the program. The three essentials, no arguments for recovery, are honesty, open-minded, and willingness. And it took me, it sounds so simple, but it took me a long time to learn that. But I did want to comment on the notion of honesty, still kind of fudging on things when the absolute truth would be perfectly acceptable and we could move on.
Well, you know what's funny is the people, you don't need to be an alcoholic or a drug addict in recovery to understand the importance of honesty. I mean, most normal people, honesty, especially where I was raised, and honesty was just something that you were taught at an early age, and it's a whole lot easier to be honest the first time than it is to allow things to pile up. It just seems to be, for those of us who have experienced all the consequences of our disease, honesty was the first casualty, I guess, of the first character defect that showed up. But Louis, before we get too deep into this,
Yes.
why don't you introduce our guest to our listeners? Even though
He's already exposed himself.
yeah, but
So-
why don't you explain how he ended up at the wonderful lush studios here doing our show with us?
Notice the backdrop, guys. That we live this. This is our life right here.
That's right.
Okay. So this is Chris Filari. Chris, I can't remember how we met, but I'm sure it was fateful.
Your golf tournament.
That's right, the golf tournament. We did that's right. We did a charity golf tournament for Healing Transitions in Raleigh, and Chris was. I think you bought a team, I believe. Didn't you?
I bought a team,
Yeah.
and I'm on that board.
That's right. You're on the board at Healing Transitions, which you can certainly elaborate on. But the thing that I think that has drawn me to Chris, and he may say that he's drawn to me, although I doubt it, is that he's got more years of sobriety than I do, and he's also his background story is to me fascinating, and if you don't mind, Chris, without me spilling the beans, I want you to kind of give us an idea of where you came from and then what brought you to this point, if you don't mind.
Okay, this is not a speaker meeting, but I always, when I do that, I always say it's an old Bill Cosby line, back before Bill Cosby had his issues after the Huxtables. But I started out as a child, and that was back in 1951 when I speak to some of my client groups. I remind a lot of young guys, particularly those in the golf course industry. I'll say, you guys need to realize I was born when Harry Truman was president, and they'll kind of look at me like, who is Harry Truman? Isn't he God that
Yeah.
dropped the bomb? But my story is I'd always been attracted to politics, public affairs, journalism, and from a young age, and came through my family. I'm a first generation. I'm one of those guys, first one in the family that went to college. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And like so many stories I've heard in the 17 years that I've been in the rooms, around that magical age of 12, 13, 14, when you're stealing beers from under your dad's pool table, and after a football game, someone's got a pint of very cheap whiskey, the kind of liquid courage that we need to find to ask that pretty girl to dance or to engage in other things, because we were shy, sheltered, and very clumsy about most of life skills. And like so many others that I hear this story, there was that little click. Whatever this is, I think it tastes horrible. I have no interest. I don't know why adults would be interested, but it's that warm feeling. It was that first drink that lit the match. Obviously, it took a lot of years for me to get my seat in the rooms, but for many years, I drifted. I worked on political campaigns in the Southwest. I did a lot of things in New England. I went to college in Rhode Island at Providence College. I'm also a recovering Catholic. But but it was always an orientation. I worked on Capitol Hill when as an intern in the early 70s, and I was very much attracted to that lifestyle, and worked as a journalist for a while. And ironically, I always had an attraction to open bars, and I lived in that. I like to joke that I've been around open bars since I've been 18 years old. We had the right to vote. I worked in politics when I was in college, and I ended up, interestingly, for someone with my orientation and affliction, working in the alcohol industry for over 30 years. I was a lobbyist in Washington for the brewing industry, and I moved to North Carolina in '83, where for 25 years I was the CEO of the beer and wine industry. And I like to say, with a smile on my face, that the hand that fed me definitely bit me.
You're my hero.
Well,
What a great job.
I survived
for an alcoholic.
it. I survived it. But my story's a fortunate one. I've been married to the same woman for 38 years, who's extraordinary. And when I crashed and burned, and I burned badly, went to treatment in March of 2003. It took a while for the recovery light to go on, but it was sort of the gradually and suddenly. But what I did find out, I came out and I still hadn't reached a level of acceptance. And as the book says, until I was beaten down, until in the chapter more about alcoholism in the big book, where it says we had to admit to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. And once that was the beginning of recovery, that was my first step experience. And it took a while for me to open up that door I have a home group, I have a sponsor, he has a sponsor. Once I started to find out why those people in that room were laughing sincerely and genuinely, and that they were happy, joyous, and free, and I was still miserable, I had that notion of I want what they had. And that's kind of the secret to this thing. Once that happened, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a light switch. But it's been quite a while since I found it necessary to take a drink. I would say to anyone out there that I work with or is listening tonight, there really has never been a bad day in recovery. Things have happened in life that still are tough. I've dealt with the death of a parent. I've dealt with other issues, family and loved ones. But at the same time, my sponsor always said, there's nothing that happens that taking a drink will make better. And it's a one-time, day at a time deal. I have sometimes a challenge living in the moment, but I've got a guy to my right, a guy to my left. When I kind of get derailed, I could call either one of these folks or so many other people from my home group, and I've got two of them in Raleigh. And if I don't have the answer, I know that they'll be able to give me some guidance. So I was always told this is not an I program. That's the problem with the ism that we have, the I, self, and me, that it's a we program.
Chris,
I cannot do it myself.
So how old were you when you got sober?
I got sober when I was 52,
So
and that was 17 years ago. You can do the math.
Were there other times that you tried to quit but could not or did not?
Oh, I could tell you that I tried to quit. Maybe, obviously, I guess the real answer is a lot of it go to treatment. I thought they were going to teach me how to drink responsibly when I went to Fellowship Hall. But no, there were years I would say, not today, not today, not today. And then I would find a very easy excuse about 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and it would be off to the races. And I did not understand, because I did not have access to the big book, to Dr. Silkworth's opinion. I used to hate that expression, that it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And there's another expression in the book, one drink is too many and a barrel's not enough. That was like a concept that I couldn't comprehend. I used to argue with my sponsor, no, it's not the first drink, it's about the 8th or 9th. Well, that wasn't the right answer, but I found that was everyone's answer when they first got to the rooms. And I would tell you off and on, I'd quit for a few days, sometimes a week, sometimes miraculously a month, but it never lasted. There would always be a rationale that I had. I either had a really great day and I was going to celebrate, or a really poor day and I was going to drown my sorrows. It ended very, very badly.
Yeah, would you share some of that? 'Cause I think that's,
Okay.
I really, if you don't mind.
Oh, no. It was, well, I was struggling for a while, and like a lot of us, this whole notion of denial, which consumes the act of practicing alcoholic, we will deny. My family doctor, who's a friend and been my doc for 25 years, had been warning me for 7 years, liver panels, that sort of thing. So as a good alcoholic, my solution was to quit going to the doctor.
Yeah, you can't get a bad report if you don't try.
No, I mean, it was just, I mean, that's the epitome of denial. We're just not going to do an annual physical this year. I don't want to know. And I can remember vividly, it was February 8th in 2003. I didn't live far from Rex Hospital, and I told my wife it was very cold. There was snow on the ground. I said, start my Ford Explorer. I think I'm having a heart attack. And my story is, I got to Rex about midnight. I was on the gurney. And the last thing that I heard that I remember is someone saying, I wonder if this one's going to make it. And the other thing that I heard is the doctor, whomever it was on the ER doc, he said, whatever he said he drank today, multiply it by at least 3 or 4.
That's the truth.
And, you know, it's the old couple of beers and, you know, a little vodka, very little bourbon. And I was lucky they got me there. Very low bottom. I was jaundiced. I was having some organ issues. And great doctor. I was there for 20 days. And from there I went straight to Fellowship Hall, where I spent 28 days. Learning a lot, not listening perhaps as much as I should have. And I bought in, sponsor, went to meetings, but it just, time takes time. And I was still in that industry. And once in a while, I just said, I'm going to test the waters here. I did 90 and 90 twice. I'm just going to see, certainly this beer after 90 days, and a bag of pretzels is not going to hurt. And the obsession returned with a vengeance. And I even called my own intervention at one point, which my sponsor finds amusing. I had a few friends come over to the house, and I picked up a white chip. And again, at all 5 meetings, he took me to, he said, every meeting that you go to get a white chip. And of course, I was trying to say, I really don't need a white chip because I've told you guys. And that's just how naive I was. But I can tell you that, as we like to say, if someone like me can do this program and find sobriety and find emotional sobriety and happy, joyous, and free, who was so miserable for so long, I would tell anybody listening that you certainly can do it as well. It's not easy. You've got to want to do it for yourself. And that was confusing for me too. I was going to do it for my mother and father. I was going to do it for my wife, other people. But it was explained to me that I needed to do this for myself. And in the process of working the steps, I kind of traced the family history. And, you know, I'm of an age that families didn't share a lot. Like, you know, I had a lot of great uncles that died at the age of 46 and 47.
Right.
And it's like, we didn't talk about it. We knew that Uncle Benny always had the flu at Christmas, that my grandmother always had the flu at particular times, but no one ever had a candid conversation with you.
Yeah.
And what I have learned since we have peeled the onion and gone back, and one part of my family that comes from England, I'm pretty much a Heinz 57 Pittsburgh mutt. I'm a little bit of everything, but it just doesn't run in the family. It gallops, and it once I understood that kind of filled in some gaps.
You came from it naturally. It
Oh,
was there.
I absolutely. It was, there is a genetic link to this disease. I'm satisfied. I think some of it's social as well.
Well, and
Alcohol was my issue starting at a young age, and I graduated. I developed a tolerance just like everybody else. I functioned. I always say, and it's kind of sad to say, but I always say that I missed my 40s, although I have all the speeches that I gave, the testimony, the plane tickets, and where I went and where I played golf. But I really kind of missed that period.
Yeah.
I functioned barely.
You know, it's funny. I was telling you guys, I've spent some time with my college baseball, and one of the things that they finally all realized is that I was drinking alcoholically even in college.
Correct.
So I never, and listen, we can sit here and we can take steps backwards on the things that shoulda, woulda, coulda, and that's just serves no purpose for me.
No.
I will tell you that sometimes you do get into that what if, but you know what, the truth of the matter is that's what I did, and I had a lot of good things happen to me, a lot of bad things happen to me. So you really can't you can't just pinpoint the bad things and continue to think that you deserve the good things. I mean, alcohol was a great wingman, and so were my opiates for a long time. I mean, one of the things that you'll hear at meetings all the time or from people in recovery is that it worked for me right up to the point where it didn't.
Correct.
And the minute that it didn't, it became our biggest enemy. It went from, it goes from being your greatest ally to your biggest enemy, and it's almost immediate. Unfortunately, it's been only because we don't want to admit it. It really doesn't creep up on you. I mean, it's obviously doing it. You just, that denial and that dishonesty.
Right.
Because I drank for effect. I didn't like the way it tasted, but I sure did like the way it made me feel.
Macon, I'm just thinking, when did you start? Well, how old were you when you first had your first taste? Do you remember?
Probably 16, 17 years old.
All right. So, and you quit when you were how old?
55.
All right. I started at 13. I had 38 years. You started when you were 12,
Right.
and you were 52 when you quit.
Right.
I mean, our generation, there weren't any alcoholics back then. It was just part of what you did.
Yeah, but
There was no awareness at all.
Yeah,
of
If
was
drugs.
you were in business, it's how you did business.
Yes. You were expected to drink.
you were, and the more you drank and the more successful you were, the more you were glorified. You didn't realize that you were setting yourself up into a deadly trap. I mean, for some of us, I agree with you. There's a genetic component. There's certainly life experience that plays into it. Nobody will ever completely figure it out. But the long and short of it is that some of us can drink, some of us can't.
Correct.
And that's just the truth of the matter. And when you add, for me, because I had the same tolerance issue, when you add the element of pharmaceuticals to the alcohol, it becomes, the amount of damage that you can do to yourself, not just physically, but also mentally, is incredible.
Well, but the body
And spiritually.
Yeah.
No, very much so. That's the real tough part, because your story where you went in 20 days in a detox, basically.
Right.
The body is so resilient. I mean, think about that. You did basically you were jaundiced. You basically destroyed your body, which we all have done. Macon, you were in the hospital,
I was in the
I mean,
hospital for a long time. yeah.
and yet here we are.
And I can tell you, in my case, miracles, and I'm going to knock on wood, I've been through a lot of medical issues that have required a lot of tests, and remarkably, liver, pancreas, everything has all come back to what would be considered normal.
Yeah.
Which is now
Yeah,
every
amazing.
doctor, and I'm very honest with any physician I ever deal with, that I'm in long-term recovery, and everything is predicated on one thing. Everything will continue to be okay, ideally fine, unless if there's all bets are off. And I'll just say that we're going to talk about relapse. When I first got to the rooms, I would hear the old timers always say, I may have another drunk in me, but I'm not certain I've got another recovery in me.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand it perfectly now, because after a while, that the most cherished thing I have is that serenity in emotional sobriety. I mean, it's one day at a time, but the gift that's given me just to live in my own skin and to look in the mirror and not be consumed by self-loathing, which I was for years, because I did not know that person.
Yeah, Chris, you wouldn't know this, but I walk when I don't work in the mornings, I walk with a friend of mine, Paul Strawberry, and Paul's older fella, 78, but he's brilliant, and he's a good friend, and we talk. He knows what happened to me, and he's not one of us, but he's certainly very aware of, and we talk about really creative things, staying in the moment, and
Right.
that's one of the things that we always talk about is the moment. How do we? And we talked about it this morning. We were talking about I like to call it time travel. When I was in the hospital, I hallucinated because I was going through
Right.
I was very fortunate. I detoxed while I was on a respirator, so I don't really remember much of it. Other than, it was an incredible trip that I went on that I still can remember to this day. But, how do you, when we time travel, unfortunately, we take those emotions that are connected to those times, we take them with us. And that's where it's so dangerous. I mean, for me, we talked about that today, about how, I can remember things just like it was yesterday.
Oh.
Not only do I remember the way I felt. And that is incredible. And then we romanticize about how good it felt for me to get a brand new for me to get a brand new fifth of vodka and a brand new prescription of Vicodin. It was like, I could
Christmas.
finally breathe.
Christmas.
I think my personal feeling on that issue is that that's our alcoholic drug brain. Because if you remember, every time you did something you shouldn't have done, something bad did not happen.
That's what, it sure
Right?
didn't.
So that's our brain going, maybe I can get away with it one more time. The problem is that every time something went wrong, drugs and alcohol were involved. So with us, the 13 to 15% of the population who can't do it, we just can't consume. Otherwise, things don't turn out well at some point.
Right, and the secret for, especially on the relapse part of it, the secret is to stay in the moment. We talk about, Chris, I know Fellowship Hall is a wonderful, wonderful facility, and I know that they have a wonderful track record. But one of the things that we tried to do when I went out to California to a treatment center, we really worked on mindfulness. We really worked on ways to bring ourselves back to the moment, with the senses. My wife and I talk about it all the time. The smell, the listening to things, the walk in the woods is so incredible because there's so many things that bring you straight to the moment and make you realize I am walking in the woods. Do you know how lucky I am to be completely healthy, to be healthy enough to be walking in the woods, watching deer run, listening to birds sing. I mean, things that we just never, ever, ever paid attention to. And I tell you, I had a real lesson in gratitude yesterday. You're talking about putting off doctor visits and just not knowing that the report that you were going to get was not something that you wanted to hear. So if you eliminate it, you don't have to worry about it. Well, I hadn't had my eyes checked. My wife's been on me for a while. My readers are starting to, if I don't have my readers, I can't order food at the restaurant because I can't see anything. Everything is just a blur.
I'm on that one too.
Yeah, so I went to the doctor yesterday, and he looked at me, told him I was in recovery. It's amazing how quickly, what do you do? I just got my master's in addiction counseling, co-occurring disorders. He says, are you 62 or are you 26? He's kind of making fun of me. But he said, "When's the last time you had your eyes checked?" I said, 1992. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And he just kind of looked at me. He said, "Okay." And so they dilate your eyes. And now all the machines and everything you do for your vision checks and everything else are completely different, but it's still the same thing. So when they put those little drops in your eyes and they finish, they give you these sunglasses. But when you walk outside and the sun hits you,
Blinded.
I was so uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, I always take my vision for granted until yesterday afternoon, and then I all of a sudden realized what it would be like if I didn't have my vision. And it gave me a sense of how grateful I was that I have normal eye vision. And those are the things that we just don't really pay attention to. In recovery, one of the things that I try, and when I work with my guys and trying to stay in the moment, is what do you smell? What can you feel? What do you see? Those senses can bring you back to the moment. And staying in the moment is the key of success for most of us. It's when we wander into the past trying to figure out how we could have made so many mistakes, or, geez, that was kind of fun, because as time goes on, all of the bad stuff seems to be not quite as bad as it was when you experienced it. And you also always wonder, boy, wonder what it would be like if I could drink. If I could have a big old vodka right now. Listen, I can still see a martini with slivers of ice floating in the top of it with orange peel. I can see it. I can see it right now. And I have to stay in this moment, because visiting the future or visiting the past has nothing but consequences, dire consequences for me. And I think that that's one of the things that when we talk about relapse, I think that we get lost. We get lost in the past, or we wander up into the future, and we leave the moment. Because if you're in recovery, if you're like me or like you guys, we've shared our lives. We have pretty great lives when you consider where we came from.
Extraordinary.
I mean, I could be dead. I could certainly be in jail. I could have killed people. I've got 3 kids who could very easily not be speaking to me. Instead, they tell me they love me every time I talk to them. I mean, these are simple things. You would consider them simple. They're extraordinary things for people who live the way we lived. And that's the moment is what's so important for us to try, and the folks that we want to help in recovery, the people that we want to bring into our little recovery group, those are the things that we need to try and express to them. And I think it's so important to not lose focus or lose track that, all the stories, I mean, God knows how many stories I've heard, how many stories you've heard. And I love listening to them, but they always end up the same way.
Well, on the stories, when I first got there and wasn't sure I really belonged there, like a lot of us.
You were different.
I was terminal uniqueness. I absolutely had an issue with that. But I was told by the old timers, basically the old stick around till the miracle happens, till the obsession to drink lifts and you start feeling comfortable in your own skin. And to your issue earlier, they always would say, when I'd lament woulda, coulda, shouldas, they would look at me and they say, you had to take every drink that you took.
That's right.
Because that's your story. But I was told we had a speaker meeting every Thursday night for many years at Fairview. We were in another church right down on Fairview Road. And they said, just listen to these every Thursday night. Don't miss a speaker meeting. Don't miss a meeting. But you're going to see people that you think you have absolutely nothing in common with. It could be different gender, different race, different way of life, socioeconomic. And they said, I guarantee you at the end of every Thursday night, a third of what they say will be your story. And that was that common denominator of this disease puts us all on equal, just another bozo on the bus. So it took a while. Again, I wanted to go in and turn on the light switch. I'm ready to go. Let's get rid of the obsession. Let's clear out the past. It didn't work that way. I suspect it won't work that way till I'm pushing up daisies one of these days. This is a lifelong journey. And the last thing before Lewis says, on living in the moment, there's a good friend of mine, and this word may not be appropriate here. He'd always say, if you got 1 foot in tomorrow, and he tells newcomers, 1 foot in tomorrow, the other one, one in yesterday and one in tomorrow, you're pissing on today. I mean, this is all we've got. So if we're lamenting yesterday and looking forward to tomorrow, we're missing living today.
And we also, I think, the great thing about the fellowship is it nurtures the spiritual side of us. That's typically the alcohol and the drugs have completely eliminated the spiritual side of us. And whether you're a God believer or whether you're, we use the term higher power. For me, it's God.
Right.
But it's just amazing how important that spiritual element is in recovery, and how it disappears when you're in active addiction. It's funny. I read, I send out. I get some really good messages from Hazelden. I went to school at Hazelden Betty Forrest, where I just graduated, got my master's from, and so I get stuff from them every morning. But it made the point that most people don't rely on God until they need Him. Those foxhole prayers.
Yep, those old SOS.
And one of the things I will say about recovery is that I have my need for God is on gratitude now. I have this gratitude as opposed to calling Him, always making it a 911 call. Oh God, I'm in trouble. Can you please show up?
Just one more time.
Yeah, that's foxhole
I'll never do
prayers.
that again.
Yeah, I'll promise I'll never do
Yes.
that again if I can just get out of this. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I do love talking to people, long-term recovery. But I also love talking to people in early recovery because you watch them, and you watch the lights slowly start to come back on into the building, and
It's great.
if you can,
That's great.
if you can, and you listen, we can never assure anybody. You and I both know, just because you're in recovery, life doesn't you don't start having cakes every day delivered to your house because you're in recovery. Bad things happen to good people. It just happens. And just because you're not drinking doesn't mean that things aren't going to happen to you that you scratch your head about, and that really make it difficult for you to maintain your the even keel that sobriety has brought me. And so having people to talk to, being around people who are doing the same thing you're doing has certainly helped us a lot. But I love the readings. I love talking about mindfulness. I love talking about how you bring people back to the moment, and how you make them comfortable that honesty can become a way of life that will secure your sobriety. It's a requirement.
Well, I think that in reference to this relapse thing, some people tell other people that's part of your story. That's part of your recovery. It doesn't have to be.
No.
The problem that I see, I have a more bird's eye view because of Wellwyn, and I see a lot of folks come in and I hear what they say, and the denial on their part that this is it, particularly the ones that are our age when we get sober. We can't believe that at that age we have to stop doing something that is not only legal and that most of our friends do, that we can't ever touch it. And the relapse part of this thing to me is what I ended up having to do for myself was I had to trick myself into saying the only thing I can't do is drink.
Right.
And if you're talking about the stories, after I got sober, I lost my father, my wife, and my mother in back-to-back years. And it was not good.
Right.
And yet I didn't relapse. And quite frankly, I don't remember exactly how I didn't.
But you weren't insulated from the emotional roller coaster. And, I went through, we talk about white knuckle sobriety early on. I can tell you a lot of people that are close to me in early recover, I think would have been happier if I started drinking again.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I was more miserable because I had not worked the steps. I had not gotten to step 2, and I was just grinding it out. I hadn't let anything go, and it was sheer misery. And some people say, really you were, at least we knew what to expect. I mean, I could not, I was living without my best friend of many years, and it took quite a while for that separation and acceptance to set in.
Well, a lot of us have to me, you have to have a plan. If you guys went away to treatment, as did I. When you come out of there, if you're just thrown back into life without a plan. I mean, we're businessmen, right? You never go into business without a business plan.
Right.
None of us thought about the fact that we needed a plan going forward. That to me was, and still is, what's key for someone who wants to go into. And I mean, treatment programs are great. You don't have to go to treatment to get sober. It helps a great deal. It speeds up the process, but you need to have a plan when you do it. You need to know that you need to engage with other people in this fellowship on a daily basis, particularly when you're young in the recovery process. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
The brilliance of the early folks in AA, the founders, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. I mean, the history of the fellowship is really phenomenal, and you can see the hand of God, because so many different things could have happened that didn't happen, But we got exactly what we were supposed to get. But the brilliance of facing your past and doing as much repair as you can, kind of is that business plan. I mean,
Yes.
the business.
But you've got to do it.
But you've got to,
Yes.
and I'm going to tell you something. He gives you, I mean, and I think that it was refreshing for me because I didn't know how I was going to do it. Well, you know what? Somebody's already figured it out. All you have to do is follow the directions,
Painting by the numbers.
Yeah, and so if you've got, if you can find people who can point that out to you and pat you on the back while you're doing it and say, listen, sometimes this is going to be hard. I mean, you heard Kayla. She was apprehensive about her own parents because you're the only person who really knows all the stuff that you did. And if you don't clean that out, it will completely rob you of your serenity.
Well, something I've been thinking about, and we talked about this before we started the show, the last 10 weeks and what the world has dealt with in this global pandemic. And I've been reading a lot of the literature, rereading it. I've had time at home to do a lot of stuff, and I need to be very careful not to contemplate too long because I'll get spun up again. However, when you think about it, we talked about this at the top, that this is June the 9th. 3 days ago, June 6th, was the anniversary or 85th birthday of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I'm allowed to say that.
Absolutely.
Oh, you've blown the cover again, Chris.
And well, I mean, we've talked about the rooms. I think we're talking in code here. But, June 6th of 1935 was the day that Dr. Bob Smith had his last drink after he'd gone on his final bender at a medical conference on Long Island. And Bill Wilson was living with him in his place in Akron, and that was always considered the first day, and is, of AA. But early on, and I've read all the histories of AA, the official sanctioned ones, Not God, which was the first one that was written. But you think about that, it was 1935 when the fellowship was formed, and that was really 6 years after the height of the Depression. Prohibition was technically in effect from 1919 to 1933, so buying alcohol was illegal, yet all these people were standing in line and having issues, which is another subject. But if you recall in the literature, when World War II started, there was a lot of concern how people in recovery would respond to war conditions.
Yep.
And without being very scientific, when the men came back and women came back, it seemed as though, again, without scientific data, that they did well and almost better than others because of the spiritual principles that they'd adopted. And I think it's the same thing for things like this pandemic. We've lived in this upside down world. What it has done is isolated us, and we know this is a disease of isolation. The good news, I hope, that comes out of this is through Zoom and other modes of electronic communication now, and I know there are outside meetings and other things. A third of what they say will be your story, and that was that common denominator of this disease puts us all on equal. Just another bozo on the bus. So it took a while. Again, I wanted to go in and turn on the light switch. I'm ready to go. Let's get rid of the obsession. Let's clear out the past. It didn't work that way. I suspect it won't work that way till I'm pushing up daisies one of these days. This is a lifelong journey. And the last thing before Lewis says, on living in the moment, there's a good friend of mine, and this word may not be appropriate here. He'd always say, if you got 1 foot in tomorrow, and he tells newcomers, 1 foot in tomorrow, the other one, one in yesterday and one in tomorrow, you're pissing on today. I mean, this is all we've got. So if we're lamenting yesterday and looking forward to tomorrow, we're missing living today.
And we also, I think, the great thing about the fellowship is it nurtures the spiritual side of us that's typically the alcohol and the drugs have completely eliminated the spiritual side of us. And whether you're a God believer or whether you're, we use the term higher power, for me it's God.
Right.
But it's just amazing how important that spiritual element is in recovery and how it disappears when you're in active addiction. It's funny. I read, I send out, I get some really good messages from Hazelden. I went to school at Hazelden Betty Forrest, where I just graduated, got my master's from, and so I get stuff from them every morning. But it made the point that most people don't rely on God until they need Him. Those foxhole prayers.
Yep, those old SOS.
And one of the things I will say about recovery is that I have my need for God is on gratitude now. I have this gratitude as opposed to calling Him, always making it a 911 call. Oh God, I'm in trouble. Can you please show up?
Just one more time.
Yeah, that's
I'll never do
prayers.
that again.
Yeah, I'll promise I'll never do
Yes.
that again if I can just get out of this. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I do love talking to people, long-term recovery. But I also love talking to people in early recovery because you watch them, and you watch the lights slowly start to come back on into the building, and
It's great.
if you can,
That's great.
if you can, and you listen, we can never assure anybody. You and I both know, just because you're in recovery, life doesn't you don't start having cakes every day delivered to your house because you're in recovery. Bad things happen to good people. It just happens. And just because you're not drinking doesn't mean that things aren't going to happen to you that you scratch your head about, and that really make it difficult for you to maintain your the even keel that sobriety has brought me. And so having people to talk to, being around people who are doing the same thing you're doing has certainly helped us a lot. But I love the readings. I love talking about mindfulness. I love talking about how you bring people back to the moment, and how you make them comfortable that honesty can become a way of life that will secure your sobriety. It's a requirement.
Well, I think that in reference to this relapse thing, some people tell other people that's part of your story. That's part of your recovery. It doesn't have to be.
No.
The problem that I see, I have a more bird's eye view because of Wellwyn, and I see a lot of folks come in and I hear what they say, and the denial on their part that this is it, particularly the ones that are our age when we get sober. We can't believe that at that age we have to stop doing something that is not only legal and that most of our friends do, that we can't ever touch it. And the relapse part of this thing to me is what I ended up having to do for myself was I had to trick myself into saying the only thing I can't do is drink.
Right.
And if you're talking about the stories, after I got sober, I lost my father, my wife, and my mother in back-to-back years. And it was not good.
Right.
And yet I didn't relapse. And quite frankly, I don't remember exactly how I didn't.
But you weren't insulated from the emotional roller coaster. And, I went through, we talk about white knuckle sobriety early on. I can tell you a lot of people that are close to me in early recover, I think would have been happier if I started drinking again.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I was more miserable because I had not worked the steps. I had not gotten to step 2, and I was just grinding it out. I hadn't let anything go, and it was sheer misery. And some people say, really, you were, at least we knew what to expect. I mean, I could not I was living without my best friend of many years, and it took quite a while for that separation and acceptance to set in.
Well, a lot of us have to, you have to me, you have to have a plan. If you go, you guys went away to treatment, as did I. When you come out of there, if you're just thrown back into life without a plan, I mean, we're businessmen, right? You never go into business without a business plan.
Right.
None of us thought about the fact that we needed a plan going forward. That to me was, and still is, what's key for someone who wants to go into. And I mean, treatment programs are great. They're not. You don't have to go to treatment to get sober. It helps a great deal.
Oh, yeah.
It speeds up the process, but you need to have a plan when you do it. It needs to. You need to know that you need to engage with other people in this fellowship on a daily basis, particularly when you're young in the recovery process. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
The brilliance of the early folks in AA, the people, the founders, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. I mean, the history of the fellowship is really phenomenal, and you can see the hand of God, because so many different things could have happened that didn't happen, you know. But you know, we got exactly what we were supposed to get. But the brilliance of facing your past and doing as much repair as you can, kind of is that business plan. You know, I mean,
Yes.
the business.
But you've got to do it.
But you've got to,
Yes.
and I'm going to tell you something. He gives you, I mean, and I think that it was refreshing for me because I didn't know how I was going to do it. Well, you know what? Somebody's already figured it out. All you have to do is follow the directions, you know?
Painting by the numbers.
Yeah, and so if you've got, if you can find people who can point that out to you and pat you on the back while you're doing it and say, listen, sometimes this is going to be hard. I mean, you heard Kayla. She was apprehensive about her own parents because you're the only person who really knows all the stuff that you did. And if you don't clean that out, it will completely rob you of your serenity.
Well, something I've been thinking about, and we talked about this before we started the show, the last 10 weeks and what the world has dealt with in this global pandemic. And I've been reading a lot of the literature, rereading it. I've had time at home to do a lot of stuff, and I need to be very careful not to contemplate too long because I'll get spun up again. However, you know, when you think about it, we talked about this at the top, that this is June the 9th. 3 days ago, June 6th, was the anniversary or 85th birthday of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I'm allowed to say that.
Absolutely.
Oh, you've blown the cover again, Chris.
And well, I mean, we've talked about the rooms. I think we're talking in code here. But, you know, June 6th of 1935 was the day that Dr. Bob Smith had his last drink after he'd gone on his final bender at a medical conference on Long Island. And Bill Wilson was living with him in his place in Akron, and that was always considered the first day, and is, of AA. But early on, and I've read all the histories of AA, the official sanction ones, Not God, which was the first one that was written. But you know, you think about that, it was 1935 when the fellowship was formed, and that was really 6 years after the height of the Depression. Prohibition was technically in effect from 1919 to 1933, so buying alcohol was illegal, yet all these people were standing in line and having issues, which is another subject. But if you recall in the literature, when World War II started, there was a lot of concern how people in recovery would respond to war conditions.
Yep.
And without being very scientific, when the men came back and women came back, it seemed as though, again without scientific data, that they did well and almost better than others because of the spiritual principles that they'd adopted. And I think it's the same thing for things like this pandemic. We've lived in this upside down world. What it has done is isolated us, and we know this is a disease of isolation. The good news I hope that comes out of this is through Zoom and other modes of electronic communication now, and I know there are outside meetings and other things, that maybe we're going to open up some new opportunities to bring people into the program, or maybe in this period of 10 weeks, people are going to realize, maybe today's a good time for me to start thinking about putting it down.
Yeah.
That's my hope and prayer.
You know what, and Chris, I totally agree with you. I know that our group, we have considered keeping the Zoom element, even after we can return to the rooms, keep the Zoom element for people who may not have transportation. I mean, as we know, people in early recovery usually don't have a driver's license for obvious reasons. And so if we can make our meetings available to them, maybe we can offer some hope to the alcoholic that still suffers, which is, our mission statement is to help those who still need help. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And in doing that, we extend our own sobriety. I mean, the secret of our fellowship is one alcoholic helping another. And I got to tell you, the service component for me personally is the thing that I hang my hat on. I need to be talking about what happened to me. And I need to share it, not in a way that glorifies, but in a way for people to look at me today. I have, I have clear eyes, according to the doctor, pretty good eyes. And
Since 1991.
yeah, and
Wow.
so
Better late than never.
Somebody, Chris, I think that you said the miracle. One of the things that my friend Paul and my wife, she walks with us on the weekends, is life itself is a miracle. The miracle is being alive. And for us to be, aware of exactly for us not to allow alcohol or drugs to cloud our awareness is the miracle. I mean, it's just a miracle to live in such a way, that you wake up in the morning and you feel good about yourself. I don't have to remember any of the stuff that I used to try and remember when I wake up in the morning.
Like where your car is.
Yeah.
What did you watch on TV last night? Where did I leave my car keys?
Or more importantly, I can't believe I woke up at 6 and the liquor store didn't open until 9. I got 3 hours. I got to figure out some way to do something.
Whose bed is this?
Yeah, yeah.
All of the above.
Yeah, and so the miracle really is life itself. And there's so many components. It's a fascinating conversation. But one of the things that we want to continue to do is talk about the different elements of recovery. Chris, we appreciate you coming in tonight. We're going to run out of time here.
Been my pleasure.
We'll have you on again, and we appreciate your willingness to share your experience. Hopefully somebody heard it, and maybe they'll make that decision that it's time for them to take a different path, that maybe it's time to sober up and see what life is like without problems. And I shouldn't say that without self-inflicted wounds that alcohol does to you. I mean, problems, we're never going to be immune from problems. That's just the way life works. But if you're sober, you got a much better chance of handling them properly the first time than you do
Very much so.
to make them a little bit worse. Lewis, tell us about, we only have a minute or two. Well, when you guys back open? What's going on?
Well, not yet. We are thinking very hard about when to open. I mean, obviously, phase 3, I think, opens in North Carolina July 1st. And because our folks tend to be a little bit older, and we've got a couple of folks around 70 or so, we need to kind of walk, crawl before we walk, kind of thing. There are treatment centers I understand that are popping open before then. It's interesting that the residential programs, I have heard of very few incidents in residential programs. I think they're taking incredible measures, like quarantining people 14 days before they allow them to come in. They're really taking phenomenal measures. You don't hear about what happens in the nursing homes. Let's say I hear none of that. I think I've heard of 2 people possibly. So we want to kind of take it easy. Right now, the web function of our program is working fairly well.
Well, that's fantastic. I know that my wife Taylor in IOP, they're seeing people, but they certainly are maintaining their social distance. So we appreciate everybody who tuned in tonight. We hope that you heard something that maybe will help you. We'll be back next week with something else to talk about around recovery. Thanks so much. And we also want to thank all the law enforcement folks. They've been kind of getting beat up a little bit. We want to make sure that we say that we appreciate them and we realize how important it is in our society. So this is clearly not a political show, but it's kind of hard not to turn something on right now and hear all kinds of stuff. So, Lewis, next week,
Yes.
I look forward to hearing about your week.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much.
Yes,
Good
thank you for
luck
coming.
in
My
your continued
pleasure.
sobriety, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.
One day at a time.
Did we nail it
You've
again?
been listening to
Yeah.
The Recovery Boys
Wow.
on WFJA. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery
I was
Boys.
telling Lewis, there was a guy from Sanford here, and Kevin